What is up, Flutter devs? Welcome to today's Widget Workshop. A Widget Workshop is a relatively brief live coding exercise where I show you how to build a particular widget or visual effect in Flutter. They typically range from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on what we're building. Today, we're going to build an onboarding flow that transitions from one screen to another by expanding a small circle to fill the screen. This particular design concept comes from Dribbble, and I've included a link in the video description. If you enjoy these videos, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And with that said, let's get into the workshop. Welcome to today's Widget Workshop. So how are we going to build this thing? Well, we're going to start by treating the entire background and that button at the bottom like one big painting. We're going to paint it statically, and then we're going to animate it. So let's jump in. Here we have a project ready to go, and the details around the app bar up here at the top, as well as this little playback control at the bottom, are all housed within the Widget Workshop scaffold. So we're not going to go into those details, just know that it's there and it's already pre-built for us. What we're interested in is all the other visual details that don't yet exist. And we're going to begin by replacing this container that currently paints a white background. We're going to give it a custom paint, and we're going to start painting the desired colored background and that button at the bottom. So let's make that happen. So we'll replace the container with the custom paint widget. We'll get rid of the color designation. It wants a painter. We will create one called, we'll call it Circle Transition Painter. Let's define that. Circle Transition Painter extends, custom painter. That's going to want us to implement a couple methods. For now, we will always repaint. And then the question is, what do we want to paint? So we know that we're going to need a background color. We know that we're going to need the color of that circle at the bottom. And then we're actually going to need the color of the next circle that will come at the end of the animation. So let's take in all of those values in a constructor here. We want a background color. We want a current circle color, and we want a next circle color. We're also going to want a transition %. So let's go ahead, and actually all three of those colors technically only need to be applied to a paint. We're going to paint with them, so we don't actually need to save the colors themselves. We're going to want a background paint. We're going to want a current circle paint. We're going to want a next circle paint, and we're going to want a transition %. So in here, in our initializer list, we will create a new paint, and its color is going to be the background color. Then we're going to instantiate the current circle paint, and its color is going to be the current circle color. And then the next circle paint, its color is going to be the next circle color. And we need to pass those values into this painter before we go ahead and use them. So there's, again, the background color, there is the current circle color, and there is the next circle color. And a transition % we can have at 0 for now. So I've already hard-coded a few pages of data in here to configure each page of the onboarding flow, and it's called pages. And so we'll grab the first one and we'll pass its background color. Now the current circle color actually refers to the next background color. So that's the second page's background color. And then the next circle color at the very end of the animation is actually 2 pages ahead. So you need at least 3 pages in your onboarding flow for this animation to make any sense at all. So with that, let's paint a static frame here. So first, we will paint the background, then we will paint the circle, then we will paint the chevron being that carrot looking thing in the center of the circle. So here for the background for now, it's really easy. We can just draw paint and we will use the background paint. That will flood fill the UI. So let's save that. And now we've got this green stuff in here. That's the background. Then draw the circle. So first, let's calculate the center of the circle. And this is kind of up to you, but so it needs to be horizontally centered, that's for sure. But in terms of the vertical position, I'm going to go with like 76% of the height. And then I'm also going to define a base radius. So I guess we can put that, we'll put that right here. Now the base rate, for now, that just is the circle radius. But when we animate the circle, that's going to be the smallest the circle ever gets, is 36 pixels. So then we can say canvas, draw circle, and it wants the center, which we just calculated. And then we're going to give it the base circle radius, and then we're going to give it the next circle paint. Save that. And there's our circle. Actually, I'm sorry, this should be current circle paint. Save that. Okay, now it's white. That's what we expected. And now we want to paint that chevron on top of it. And this is going to involve bringing in, actually painting a paragraph, because the icon, the chevron icon, is part of the icon set, which is actually a font, which means we need to paint text. But first we'll get the icon. That's the arrow forward iOS. That's the icon that looks the closest to what we want. And then we actually need a paragraph builder. So we'll create a new paragraph builder. And then we're going to create a new paragraph style. For the font family, so we're trying to use that icon. We're using it as a reference here. So we want the font family that the icon is based in. We're going to go with a font size of 24. And then we're going to text align center. So we're going to center the chevron in whatever paragraph space it takes up. And that's a paragraph builder. So that establishes the way the paragraph will be not necessarily painted, but it's the non-paint related properties of the paragraph that we're going to paint. So then we will create a paragraph. So we're going to take the paragraph builder, and then we're going to tell it to build a paragraph. And then we need to lay out the paragraph. So remember, we're not in widget space anymore here. We're just in custom painting space. So there's no margins or padding or anything that's determining how this paragraph is laid out. It's up to us to decide how to lay it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in some paragraph constraints. And all we really care about, honestly, we don't really care about the constraints, but we will just limit the layout of the paragraph to the width of the circle at its smallest. And then finally, we will say canvas, draw paragraph. We'll pass in the paragraph that we built. And then we will use the same center position. Let's see, what did we call it? Circle center is where we want it. Oh, should probably spell it correctly. Nope, still didn't spell the code. Draw paragraph. There. Okay. And I forgot a couple things on the paragraph builder. So we need to specify a couple more properties. So we will push a style onto it. And the color that we currently want is we want the current background paint color. And notice that text style here is the same name as the text style that you pass into the text widget. That's actually a naming conflict. So what we have to do is come up here to our imports and we have to qualify something. So we'll take Dart UI and we'll import it as UI. And then we'll come back down here and now we need to make this a UI paragraph builder, a UI paragraph style, a UI text style, UI paragraph constraints, UI paragraph, to get rid of that naming conflict. And then after we push that style, then we're going to add text. This is where we take that icon that we looked up. So we're going to get the character code from it. So we take the icon, we get the character code, create a string, and then we make that the actual text in the paragraph builder. So again, the paragraph builder, we give it a style to apply to the paragraph. Then we're going to give it a color. So I wonder, can we give it a color here? No, for some reason it won't take a color there. So we push the color in a text style, and then we add the actual text that we want in the paragraph. Then we build the paragraph, we lay it out, and we draw it to the canvas. So let's save that. And there is our chevron, but it is not in the correct location. And that's because even though the chevron is centered, the paragraph, the top left point of the paragraph is sitting at the center of the circle when really we want it to be centered about the center of the circle. So we will subtract an offset of paragraph.width divided by 2 and paragraph.height divided by 2. And now it's centered. So now we have successfully painted the very first frame of this animation. So step 1 is complete. The next step is for us to cause this circle to animate so large that it actually looks like a vertical line, and that'll be the halfway point of our transition. To begin this next step, we need to introduce an animation controller. Now, the reason that we want to introduce an animation controller is because eventually, of course, the transition of this onboarding flow will be animated. But what we're going to do as we build it is you may be wondering what this play button and this scrubber are down here for. This is a tool for us to manually scrub through the animation that we're building to figure out exactly what it looks like and to make sure we get it right, so we don't waste time running the animation over and over and over again. But as we build this thing to control the animation, we want it to use the real animation system. So we're going to introduce an animation controller. We're going to connect the animation controller to this play button and this scrubber here. And then we're going to carefully build the first half of this animation. So back up here in our widget workshop state object, we're going to introduce an animation controller. It needs a vsync, aka a ticker provider. So we will bring the single ticker provider mixin in here, and then we will specify ourselves as the vsync, and the duration will go with 1.5 seconds. And then as always, we need to add listeners. For now, we'll simply set state as the animation plays, and we'll add a status listener. And here again, we'll just set state for now as the animation begins, ends, etc. Of course, we always need to dispose of animation controllers. And then what we're going to do is down here in this widget workshop scaffold, there's a property that we're going to use. It takes in an animation controller. So we're going to pass it our animation controller. And now we'll save that and we'll do a hot restart to rebuild our state object to create our animation controller. And now notice that I can drag this thing now. That's because we provided an animation controller to the scaffold. And so now this is actually changing the animation controller's value. Here it's 0, here it's 1, here it's about 0.5. And if we press the play button, it plays through. So now that we've got that hooked up, we can forward that information into our painter. So let's come back up here to the top of our state object and let's create a transition percent. And initially that's going to be 0. We'll pass it in here to our painter. And now let's get our painter doing a little bit of animation. So we're going to start by doing a little bit of reorganizing of our painter here. First, we're going to take this chevron painting stuff and we're going to put it in its own method. So we'll pass in the canvas, we'll pass in the circle center, and we'll pass in a color. Save that. Everything still looks good. Great. And then we need to split our painting method into 2 phases. There's the expansion phase and the contraction phase. So let's stub out a couple methods for that. All right, and then we're going to cut everything that we had up here for the painting, and we're going to paste it into paint expansion. And we also need to actually include a size in here. Then up here in the paint method, we're going to say if the transition percent is less than halfway through, we're going to calculate an expansion percent, which is equal to 0.5 minus the transition percent divided by 0.5. And then we're going to call paint expansion with the canvas, the size, and the expansion percent. Otherwise, we're over halfway through, and what we want is a contraction percent, which is equal to 1 minus the transition percent divided by 0.5, and we're going to paint the contraction. Save that, do a hot restart just in case. Oh, I remember one thing we need here. So the transition percent that we're sending in is always 0. But when our animation controller changes, we actually want to update the transition percent to the new value of the animation controller. So let's save that. Let's hot restart. And everything should look the same for the first 50%, and then it should go black, which is exactly what it does. We continue painting for the first half, and the second half we haven't implemented yet, so it's all black. That's fine. So now here we are in painting the expansion. We paint the background, that's fine. We paint the circle, we need to look at that again, and the chevron will have to adjust as well. So again, what we're trying to do here is take this circle and expand it into, make it so large that it's essentially a vertical line. Let's start by defining the max radius that the circle will grow to. We're actually going to make that 200 times the height of the screen. That's how big we're going to get to look vertical. And then let's figure out the original. Let's take the circle center up here and let's call this the base circle center. So this is the original center position. The original center position of the circle. Now, if you look carefully at this design, notice that when the circle expands, it's not the center of the circle that remains in place. It's the left side of the circle. The left side of the circle doesn't move anywhere upon expansion. So we actually need to figure out what the left bound of the circle is and make sure we don't move from it. So we want the left side of the circle, which never moves during expansion. And we're going to call that circle left bound. And where is that located? Well, it's the center of the original circle position minus the base radius. So the center of the circle minus the base radius is right here on the left side of the circle. And now we need to actually calculate the current radius. And that's going to be the max radius times the expansion percent plus the base circle radius. So 36 plus some fraction of 200 times the height of the screen. So down here under radius, we'll say current radius, and the circle center we called base circle center. But we're actually going to see an issue here, a couple issues. Let's save that. Oh, let's see what I'm missing here. Base circle center. Let's see, it's already blown up. Why is that? Let's make sure our expansion percent here is what it should be. 1.0. Okay, that's wrong. I think I have this. Do I have this inverted? Sorry, there doesn't need to be any math there at all. We know that we're less than 0.5, so we just need to divide it. Now we're okay. So as I drag this just a little bit to the right, let's see what happens to this circle. Almost immediately it blows up. But one thing we see is that it's centered around the current center of the circle. It's not holding the radius steady. So we need to actually calculate a new center for this. So we're going to take the circle left bound and we're going to add the current radius to it. And that's what's going to keep the left side always where it is. And then we're going to take the normal Y position because that doesn't need to change. So we'll send that in here as the current circle center. We'll save that. And then you see it blows up, but the left side now is staying exactly where it should. So this is actually, fundamentally, this is the correct behavior. It's expanding, but it's expanding so quickly. So we certainly don't want that. What are we going to do about that? What we want to do is slow it way down. So the growth of the radius needs to be way slower. So we're going to apply exponential reduction to the expansion rate so that the circle expands much, much slower. we're going to create a slowed expansion percent. It's still a percentage, but it's going to grow much more slowly. So we're going to actually take the expansion percent and we're going to raise it to the 8th power. We're going to multiply it against itself 7 times 8 to the 8th power. And this will cause the percentage to increase much more slowly. And so we'll take this slowed expansion percent and we'll use it to calculate the radius. Let's save that. Now check it out. Now that's much more reasonable. Now we're cooking with gas. And then black. Okay, and then what do we want to do with this chevron for right now? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the expansion percent is less than 0.1, then we'll paint it. If not, we won't paint it. And that's how that works. So in the next step, we're going to have to figure out this contraction part. How do we bring it around for the second half? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste all of our expansion painting stuff into the contraction, and then we're just going to adjust it as needed. So come down here into paint contraction, we'll paste this stuff. So we certainly need to replace the expansion percent with contraction percent. For the chevron, only if we are beyond 95% in the contraction are we going to paint the chevron. So initially we're not painting it, and at the very end we're going to paint the chevron. Also, the background color needs to shift. Right now, as we expand, the background is on the left and the circle is on the right. But the moment that we get to the second half, we need to flip and the circle is on the left, the background is on the right. And so now the background actually needs to use the current circle paint, and the circle needs to be drawn with the background paint. And eventually the chevron is, once it does appear, it's actually going to be the next circle paint. We'll see what happens with that. So we've adjusted the paints that we're using, and now we need to adjust all of our calculations. Max radius remains the same. Base circle center is still the same. The circle left bound, it's no longer the left bound. It's actually the starting right bound. So we're going to call this the let's see, circle starting right side. We're also going to want the final right side of the circle. And I'll adjust our comment up here as well. This is the initial right side of the circle, which becomes the left side of the circle by the end of the animation. And then the final right side, say final double circle ending right side, is equal to the base circle center plus the base circle radius. That's where it's eventually going to end up. And here we want to apply contraction reduction. Sorry, apply exponential reduction to the contraction rate. Contracts much more slowly. But now that we're dealing with contraction, we also kind of need an inverse here. And also we're going to have some horizontal motion. So the first half is pure expansion, but notice in the contraction that there's a little bit of sliding. We want some eased motion for that. So we're going to calculate eased contraction percent, which is we're going to use the curves, and we're going to get an ease in out, and we're going to apply it to the current contraction percent. And then we're going to calculate an inverse contraction percent, which is just 1 minus the contraction percent. And then instead of having a purely slowed expansion rate, we're going to have a slowed inverse contraction rate or contraction percent. So this is just a slowed version of this guy right here. All right, so there are a few percentages that we're going to use here. Current radius, we still need to calculate that. We're going to use the slowed inverse contraction percent. Otherwise, the calculation is still the same. And then the current circle center here is going to be a little bit different. So we want to base our thinking on the right side. So calculate the current right side of the circle. Well, that's going to equal the starting position plus the ending position minus the starting position times that eased contraction percent. So we know where we're starting, and then there's the distance we need to move, and then the current percentage that we should be moved. And that is the circle current right side value, which then leads us to the current center X. That's going to be the current right side minus the current radius, which this is like the inverse calculation of what we did to keep the left side where it is on the expansion. So that's the current X position that we want, which we will place right in here. Current circle center. Let's give that a try. We'll save that. We'll do a hot restart. Expand, flip. So I probably did something wrong with those colors. Let's see what we got going on here. Well, let's see what happens. No, I'm just applying something in the wrong direction, it looks like. Calculated this wrong too. Gee, I wish one of you had corrected me on this. Just letting me make stupid mistakes here. All right, transition percent is, we know, above 0.5 or above. So we subtract 0.5 and divide by 0.5, and that's our contraction percent. That was the dumb mistake. So now we'll come back down here. We'll start at the beginning, drag through here, expand, 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 flip, contract, contract, contract. All right, is that looking good? Let's play it at full speed. It's looking pretty sexy to me. I think we just need one more little detail here to actually have our painting complete, which is, if you look back here at the animation, notice at the very end, the next circle color actually expands in. So we want that effect at the very end, and then our painting is good to go. So let's see, what are we going to do for that? Here in the contraction, we actually need to paint a second circle. Paint the new expanding circle. If the eased contraction percent is greater than 0.9, and this is an arbitrary point that I'm choosing, so we are 90% done sliding to the right. new circle expansion percent. We're going to take the eased contraction percent. We're going to subtract 0.9 and we're going to divide by 0.1. And hopefully that percentage mapping calculation I actually got correct. Then we want the new circle radius, which is going to be the base circle radius times the new circle expansion percent. So the radius begins at 0 and then it expands to that, that base size, the normal size. And then we're going to say canvas, draw a circle. We're going to say the current circle center. We're going to say the new circle radius, and we're going to have the next circle paint. Save that. And now the chevron color is wrong. So this actually should be current circle paint. Save that. Okay. With that, let's play it in real time. All right, look at that. Super sexy. We've painted the background how we need to paint it, so now we just need to bring in the content and then get the main content sliding left and right and then actually change pages every time this runs, and then we'll be done. All right, real quick, let's get this content in here. Content's going to be real simple column structure. We'll come back up here to the widget workshop state where we're building this widget tree. And we'll come in here where the center is. We'll get rid of this to do because that's what we're going to do right now. We'll come in here. We'll place a column in here. We're going to give a cross-axis alignment of center and then give it some children. And we're going to start with a spacer. We're going to give it a flex of 30, and these numbers will all add up correctly by the end of it. And then we want a container. This is going to show an image. Now in the design, this was a square image with rounded corners. We're going to go with a rectangle that has rounded corners because we want to show some imagery that's not quite square. We're going to give this guy a decoration. It's a box decoration. Actually, this color really doesn't even matter. Let's ignore this. What we really want is clipping. So we want our image to be clipped. Clip our rect border radius. We'll go with a circular radius of 40. The child is going to be an image asset, which for now we'll just pull from the very first page. Again, that's hard-coded in another file. We want it to cover the available space, and we want the alignment to also be based on what the page says, because some of these images overflow the available space. So some of them need to be left aligned, some of them center aligned, whatever. All right, so that's going to be where the image appears, and then below that container, we're going to put another spacer in there, flex of 30. We can go ahead and save this and see what we got. Save. All right, pretty sweet psych image there. Of course, it is not horizontally centered, as it should have been here. Let's see, that might be a problem in the scaffold. Let's go check that. Okay, so this is something you shouldn't, this is a mistake that I made when creating the scaffold. You shouldn't have to worry about that, but we're just going to expand the content to take all the available space, and now it is horizontally centered, but we still have more content to go and more spacing to go. So let's come down here below this spacer, and let's see, we will introduce some text. Again, the first page will grab its title. Text align will be center. We'll give it a text style. The color will be based on what the page wants it to be. The font size will go with 36. It's pretty big. Font weight, I'm not sure it's going to make a difference on the iOS simulator, but maybe on the Android emulator, it'll actually make it bolder. We also want some padding here. We don't want the text hitting the edge of the screen. So we'll go symmetric, and then we'll say horizontal padding, horizontal. of 32. Let's save that. So did you know that Psych is the best show ever? True statement, proven fact, it's science. But we still need to add some spacing here. So below this, we're going to have a spacer flex of 40, and then another spacer with a flex of 75, and we're going to put something between those two. Let's save that. And that's pretty close to what we want. Now here's the thing. We're painting that chevron button, that circle with the chevron, we're painting it, but painters don't have any gesture detection. So we actually need to stick an invisible gesture detector on top of it. So we'll create a gesture detector. And just so you can see exactly what's going on, we'll put a container in it. We'll give it a width of 72. We'll give it a height of 72. And for now, I'm going to give it a red color with an opacity of 0.5, 50%. And eventually we're going to want an on tap here, but I'll mark that out as a to-do. Let me save that. Oh, we're not quite lined up here. Let's see. Did I get my spacers correct? I don't know. Let's reduce this guy. Let's try 30, 20. So now I got to play with these numbers. All right, well now it's lined up. So you play with it, you get it in the right spot, and then once it's there, you don't have to worry about it. But as you can see, we now have a widget sitting here exactly where that button is. And what we can do in the on tap is we can say animation controller, go forward. Save that, and now it controls the painting. I guess we should say from 0. Actually, we probably don't want that because if someone accidentally taps it, whatever, don't worry about it. We'll go forward from wherever it is. And then we want the opacity here now to be 0. And my computer is thinking. Okay, so now you can't see it anymore. So now it just looks like a button that's responding to your tap. So that is our content in place. Now we need the content to actually slide out and then slide back in. And to accomplish that, we're going to come up here and we're going to surround this column with a transform widget. It takes a matrix 4. So we're going to create it initially with translation values. We're going to calculate a content offset in a minute. Y and Z don't need to change at all. But then we are also going to apply a scale. So we're going to calculate a content scale, and we're going to apply the same scale to the X and the Y dimensions. So now we need to actually calculate those values. So calculate the position of the onboarding content. So I'm going to hard code a max offset here. You could look up a render box and calculate a portion of the screen width if you want to. That would just require maybe a layout builder or something. For our purposes, I think hard coding is fine. Now the offset percent, by default, we'll just start it at 1, but then if the transition percent is less than 25%, then we're on our way out. So we'll calculate that. Offset percent equals transition percent divided by 0.25. So that's just going to be a linear slide out. Otherwise, if the transition percent is greater than 70%, we're sliding it back in from the other side. So there the offset percent is 1 minus transition percent divided by 0.3. And then we're also going to apply some easing to it. So curves, ease in cubic. We're going to apply that to the offset percent to get an eased value. Finally, we're going to calculate our content offset, which is equal to the offset percent times the max offset. And then the content scale is equal to 0.6 plus some portion of, so it's never going to be smaller than 60% of its normal size, but the other 40% is going to be calculated based on the offset percent, its absolute value. Now let's save that. Whoops, got something wrong here on the sign. One thing, so a couple issues here. One, I need to set the alignment. I don't want it moving up. I don't want it aligned to the upper left. I want it to be the center. So that's going to change it a little bit. Okay, and then it's just going the wrong direction here. So this needs to be negative, is I think what the problem is. Yep, there you go. So the content isn't changing correctly, but it does move correctly. It slides out and then it slides back in. I'm happy with that. The final step is now to actually change the pages every time this happens, which will give us the correct title color here, and it will also apply the correct brightness values up here to our app bar. All right, let's get our paging working. We're going to create a few more tracking variables here in our state object. We're going to have a current page index, which is going to start at 0. We're going to have a current page, which we start, we should initialize that in an init state, but we do need them declared. So we need a current page index. We need a page, which is the current page. We need a page, which is the second page. We need a page, which is the third page. Remember, this animation doesn't make any sense unless you have at least 3 pages worth of content. And then we want the visible page, which sometimes can be different than the current page, and we'll see how that's calculated. So down here in init state, we will say the current page index is 0. The current page is pages 0. The second page is pages 1. The third page is pages 2, and the visible page at this moment is the same as the current page. Now, I mentioned a difference between the current page and the visible page, and that's because right here, as our animation progresses, when we get to the halfway point, the page that we're worried about changes. The page that we're actually rendering, the content, shifts. Here's page 1, 2, 1, 2. So right here, we're going to say if the transition percent is less than 0.5, then the visible page is equal to the current page. But if we're over halfway through, then the visible page is actually the second page. Let's save that. Okay, so we see page 1's content. Oops. Oh, we should actually probably use the visible page, shouldn't we? Instead of hard coding all this stuff. So down here where we mention all the pages, the background color here is current page. Then second page, then third page. And our painter knows how to switch between those, but our content doesn't. Our image and our title. So the image path here, this needs to be the visible page for the image path, the visible page for the image alignment, the visible page for the title text, and the visible page for the text color. And with that, let's save that. Now, let's give it a hot restart. So we changed our stateful object. So we need a hot restart. Now we're back. Now let's look at this page transition. Do you like the Suck It socks? The Psych Suck It socks? Pretty cool, huh? I feel like I know some of you are going to go out and buy those socks now, and I think they owe me some royalties for this. So when you buy, let them know who sent you, okay? And then send some money my way. Anyways, page 1 goes away, page 2 comes in. So here the visible page is the first page, here the visible page is the second page. And we're just celebrating all things Psych on today's Widget Workshop. Playing it in real time, but we're still stuck at the end of the animation. We can't get to the next page, so we need to do something about that. And that is where the end of the animation becomes important. So if that animation status is completed, then we want to actually move to the next page. So we'll take the current page index and we'll add 1 to it, but then we need to take that index and we will mod it by the pages.length, because if it gets too far, it needs to go back to 0. And then we want the second page index. We need to calculate that. So that's the current page index plus 1, again, mod pages.length. And that means the second page is then equal to whatever is at that new index. And then we need to do that one more time for the third page. But instead of adding 1, we need to add 2. And then lastly, we need to go ahead and change our animation controller back to 0 and set our transition % back to 0 so that we're ready to animate the next page. And as we look at this running as it should, I'm going to come down here to the scaffold and I'm going to turn off the transition player, the tool that we've been using. And by the way, the background brightness here should be set to the visible page background brightness. And that controls this part up here. So when we play this back in a second, watch the color of the app bar up here and the status bar as we go through different pages. Let's save that. Let's do a hot restart. Oops, let's see, what do we do wrong here? We didn't bother to actually update the current page. Save that, hot restart. Let's try that again. Psych, the best show ever. Suck It Socks. And lastly, come on, son. Come on, son. You know we're done with this widget workshop. Come on, son. Right back to the beginning. Pretty sexy, if you ask me. Pretty smooth. And more than anything, pretty done. So I'll see you in the next widget workshop.